Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Return to Office Mandates, What It Means for Workers, Companies, and Gender Equality. I'm Professor Heejung Chung, the director of the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership, and here at King's College London, and I'll be presenting and chairing this session today. It's only a few years in the pandemic where many workers, for the first time for many, have started to work remotely and were able to work from home. And that had really transformed the lives of many workers, enhancing some of their well-being, kind of work-life balance, changing their relationship to work. And for many, especially maybe men and fathers, really changed the relationship with their family and shifting how labor was divided within the home space. But there is a trend that has been accelerating, that many companies, including the likes of Amazon boss, but also others, have been criticizing remote working as some of the reasons behind the decline of performance, decline of profits, decline of productivity of the workforce. And just yesterday, HSBC has also announced that they will be not only mandating at least minimum 3 days in office, kind of return to office mandate, but they will be actually providing sanctions, financial sanctions, to workers who do not adhere to this mandate. And we see these kinds of media attention in terms of companies, but also big CEOs, such as the likes of Marks and Spencer's ex-boss, talking about the problems of home working, but also the need for return to office. So today's webinar is really a crucial one, given that I think this has really kind of increased a lot of anxiety for a lot of workers, but also kind of raised a lot of questions for employers, whether or not the RTO is something they should follow or they can resist. So over the next hours, we will be hearing from myself and Shiyu Yuan, who will be presenting our Joel's new report on return to office mandate. But also it'll be followed by commentary and discussion from our wonderful panel. This includes Julia Hobsbawm OBE, author of The Nowhere Office and the founder of Workathon, Emma Jacobs, work and careers columnist from the Financial Times, Ellen Scott, a digital editor at Stylist and the author of the very exciting upcoming book, Working on Purpose, and my colleague Shiyu Yuan, a PhD candidate and a research fellow at the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership. But after that, that is where we will open it up for questions, where I encourage you to ask any questions that you might have, both after, but also during the session. And if you look underneath, you will see a Q&A button there where you could write down any questions you have. And if you want, you can address those questions specifically to certain people. And we will try to capture as much as possible towards the end of this session. So, okay, this is kind of, so I'll have to introduce myself. So I'll be presenting kind of our results, again, followed by Shiyu, who will be providing the data analysis results. So, oops, sorry, I'm going to try that again. Is this thing all right? Does it look all right? Thank you. Okay, so again, this is kind of our report for the King Jewel, which is the return to office mandate. What is at stake for workers, companies, and gender equality? As I mentioned before, recently we have seen a great rise of media reports about not only certain CEOs or employers kind of push back against or stigmatize views against home workers in terms of their commitment, productivity, team cohesion, culture building, but also based on that stigmatized view of remote workers, a lot of companies now pushing for what we call kind of a return to office policy. And we've seen that from Amazon. We've seen that for companies, even companies where work could easily be done at home full-time, such as Google, Apple. But recently, again, HSBC and other banks such as Barclays, stating not only are workers to be back minimum of certain number of days, but also stating that those who do not adhere to these requirements will be suffering from financial and career penalties. KPMG last year has published a report talking about how most bosses that they have surveyed mentioned that they expect a full return, kind of back into the old days, pre-pandemic type work designs within the next 3 years. A couple of years ago, the head of CBI also has mentioned that most bosses actually want staff back in the office 5 days a week as well. With a lot of these kind of debates and ongoing kind of headlines, what we've kind of missed is exactly what is happening, because a lot of the debates and the information we get about the return to office mandate has been really about cases of companies or cases of certain individuals talking about remote working. However, what we don't really have is good enough data at a large scale that is from representative surveys to see exactly what is actually happening, what has been happening in recent times. So what we did was looking at the UK Labour Force Survey. Again, Labour Force Survey, for those of you who do not know, is the largest and the most representative survey we have in the UK, with over 50,000 employees in the data quarterly from 2017 to 2024, which is our recent data. We supplement this analysis using the survey of working arrangement and attitude survey with over 5,000 individuals, which then later on become 2,500 employees, again, representative of the UK labor market from the 2022 first quarter to 24 fourth quarter. For those of you who are interested, and those of you who are very well, tuned into this area, the survey of working arrangement and attitude is the AKA kind of Nick Bloom data, but we have the ones for the UK market. And the questions that we're asking today is there an increase in return to office trends in the UK market based on these two data sets? Are we seeing employers mandating a return to office? Again, using this way data, but also looking at the trends that we see of workers' home working patterns. And when there will be, and there's a potential RTO mandate by employers, what are the employees' responses going to be? And here we distinguish between 3 types of responses. One is quit straight away within the next month. The second is not quit straight away, but that they will be actively looking for a new job that allows for home working. And the third is, oh, well, comply. And based on these results, as well as some of the other analysis we've conducted around remote working, we're trying to explore what the implications are for this with regards to workers, companies, and gender equality. So first up is our LFS data. One of the things we can see, and just to kind of clarify, this data we explore the extent to which workers say home is their main place of work. And as you can see, less than 10%, about 5 to 7% of workers have said home is their main place of work in 2007 all the way to 2019, just before the pandemic. Even during the pandemic, this is like the second quarter of 2020, where we know that approximately half of the workers had to be at home due to the lockdown measures. Most workers didn't say that home was their main place of work because, again, everybody thought this was a temporary solution to a very kind of acute situation, which was the COVID-19 pandemic and the virus spread. Only after I don't know if everybody remembers this, but the Freedom Day of July 2021, we see an increase of workers saying that home is their main place of work, as we could see in that third quarter of 2021. And since 2022, we see actually quite a stable trend of home working. So workers saying that home is their main place of work. We expect people who are working at least kind of 2-3 days a week from home. And kind of another thing to notice that not only is it stable or stabilized since 2022, we see that the gender gap that we've observed before the pandemic and during the pandemic between men and women has declined to the point where there's no gender difference between men and women in the kind of especially the last quarters of 2024. Now I'm going to move to Shiyu, who will be kind of presenting our SWAY data results.
Yes, so here we're looking at how often people working from home using the Swain data. We break this down looking at specifically how many days people working from home. And from this graph, we can see since 2022, there's over 40% workers in the UK actually able to working from home at least 1 day per week. And if we're specifically looking at each day that people work, we can see now actually still 25% of workers can working from home 3 or more days from home. And the largest group are those who can working fully from home, like 5+ days a week, like the light green area. And the slightly decrease in those who can fully remote from home, but rather than these workers go back to office, like full time, we see this increasing in workers who can working occasionally and 1 day or 2 day a week. So if anything happening, it is more like now workers able to working from home in a more hybrid model in the UK. Go next slide, please. And we also break this down by gender and parent status. We see this trend is much clear in mothers and fathers, especially mothers. We see across time, there's more mothers able to working from at least 1 day a week. And especially we see now this increasing number of mothers saying they could working 1 day or 2 day per week. For fathers, we see similar trends, although there's more fluctuations if you're looking at this 2024, early 2024. And interestingly, we can see very clearly in fathers, quite a lot of them able to working from full time, even in 2024, without like big job across time. Next slide. And so after looking at the employee side, we here looking at the official policy in the employer side. We calculate this based on the average of home working days that employers allowed, and we include in those employers doesn't allow working from at all. And the message is very clear that across time, we see that employers provide more opportunities for workers to working from home. In early 2022, there's only around 0.9 days a week that workers allowed to working from home. But by 2024, this number has increased to 1.3 days per week. Next slide, please. And we can see it is especially mothers. If we're looking at this graph, the mothers and fathers gained a steady increase in the days to working from home. And especially mothers, we see this is very consistent, steady increase in the days they're allowed to working from home. Next slide. And we further explored how would workers do if the employers forced everybody back to office full time. And the response is actually call back to what we found in the trend of home working. So in early 2022, we see this 54% workers say they will comply and go back to office full time. But by the end of 2024, especially look at the middle of 2024, there's only 40% work say so. And especially looking at those who can start to look for new jobs, this more actually become the most common responses among all the workers. Again, as well, for those who say they will quit immediately, this number almost doubled since 2022. And we also break this down by gender. We can see it is women are leading this long-term pushback. There's very sharp decline in women saying they would willing to go back to office full time. In early 2022, there's around 50% of men and women said they would follow the policy. But for women, by the end of 2024, it's only around 37% say so. For men, although we don't see so much decreasing in the willingness to go back to office full time, we see those who said they would quit immediately, just like women, also almost doubled over the 2 years. Finally, we also want to show that it's actually more than just women's issue, because if we break this down by parent status, we see fathers of these school-age kids show very increasing resistance to go back to office full time. And especially we're looking at this graph. In early 2022, there's around 63% of fathers of old kids saying they would comply the policy. But by the end of 2024, there's only 47% of these fathers that do so. And especially if looking at this, fathers say they will quit immediately with another job lined up. This number almost doubled and significantly increased over, especially after 2023. And the mothers, we found similar results, although not as sharp as fathers in terms of saying they're going to quit immediately. Now go back to Heejung.
Thank you, Shiyu. So as you can see, and I just want to also highlight that a lot of there's more graphs and figures available in the full report for anyone who's interested. But I think the kind of sum up one thing we could say is that it doesn't seem to be a very clear trend for mass return to office, at least in the UK, at least in the data points that were gathered. And if anything, working from home rates have remained relatively stable since 2022. And even in employers' policies as well, we don't see a big shift in the elimination of home working opportunities. Rather, we see a slow increase in the average number of days home working is permitted, mostly because there has been especially more maybe companies or workers who have been able to work at least a couple of days a week from home. Most importantly, RTO mandates, when enforced, will face growing resistance, and especially women are more likely to resist, but it is parents, especially of older children, who has shown the growing resistance towards kind of RTO mandates. And what does this all mean for HR and policy? I think it's really important for HR managers and company CEOs, C-suites to understand that the genie is out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. Like, flexibility is now a baseline expectations, not just for mothers, but all workers. Again, we showed some increase of fathers, but again, it's not just fathers, it's all workers. We see that increasingly workers are saying they do not want to come back. If you are going to make them come back, they will quit straight away, or at least actively look for jobs that allow for home working. If you do mandate an RTO, you risk creating a two-tier labor market, which will be hindering gender equality, but also talent retention of all sorts, as well as a reduction of workers' well-being. So rather than an RTO, we suggest employers try codifying hybrid models. And, we're sympathetic towards some of the, many of the problems that managers say home working can increase. So we do expect, for example, a good hybrid model such as an anchor day with a coordinated in-office presence to maximize engagement and cohesion to address these issues, rather than to kind of resort back to these full RTO models. And another thing to say is that, so the managers who are, or companies who are facing challenges in terms of skill retention, but also recruitment, should perhaps actively try to use remote working and other types of flexible working arrangements to attract and retain talent. I did mention on LinkedIn, for those of you who do follow me, that this report was mostly written for fathers, including my own partner, who has really been able to gain the access to home and remote working, but also for the first time was able to maybe find a balance that works for them, their children, but also their female partners in heterosexual relationship. And I want to say this to them: flexibility is the norm. And if you are facing this RTO mandate, I think resistance is reasonable. I think it's important to understand that there is growing and a very large body of evidence to show that home working can be productive, inclusive, and sustainable, and that it is not just a perk for workers, but is also an important smart working tool for companies, and that it isn't only just for mothers, that this is a policy that is widely popular towards, but also everybody, including fathers and workers without children, have a right towards, not just in the legal sense, but also in the more kind of organizational performance sense of it. But having said that, I think we do want to say this to the workers as well, that hybrid working has to be done well. Then workers should actively, proactively work with colleagues and managers to try to find ways for better collaboration, mentoring, and in any concerns that managers do have with regards to managing a hybrid team. And so we encourage people to think collectively and coordinate to build the right hybrid workplace culture, which we'll be talking about again in the panel, but also the King's Global Institute will be presenting another report towards the end of next month around this topic. And finally, I know this is a scary time for many workers at the moment with this whole rise of RTO, but I would encourage to say that don't be scared, because I think what we show is that there is enough flexibility and remote working opportunities out there. So if it isn't your company, and if the collective fight back doesn't work, maybe there will be other options available to you. And again, for managers, this is an amazing time to recruit skilled talent force to really enhance your workplace. So please make the most out of it. So thank you. So I'll just stop sharing. And I would like to invite our panel members to join us to have a discussion. So, okay, so I'll start first with Ellen. So Ellen, you've written an amazing piece on the Stylus recently about the responses to the RTO mandate and what this means for gender equality. And one of the kind of things that we find liking in our report is that these are all numbers. So what are some of the human stories behind remote working, but also the fears about RTO? And can you maybe talk about how it has maybe transformed people's lives and how they might fear this RTO mandates?
For sure. So last month I worked on a big feature for Stylist magazine where I work, about how return to office mandates are affecting women specifically. And the kind of overwhelming response from people was one of just fear. There's just a real worry that their bosses are going to suddenly order them back to work. I think because there's a lot of kind of high profile anti-working from home sentiment. Like we saw the BBC Panorama did their whole working from home show. In the US, there's a lot of anti-working from home sentiment going on there. And I think there have been a couple of businesses in the UK that have been very vocal about ordering everyone back to work. The women that I spoke to who had experienced return to office orders, were sharing stories of, there was one woman who had moved out of London because she couldn't afford a place in London, because who can? It's very expensive. So she relocated. That was fine with her workplace when she was there. Then she was made redundant, and trying to find a new workplace that would allow her to just commute in once or twice a month has been impossible. She's still unemployed. She's still struggling to find a job that will fit her needs. And it's impossible because if she does go into the office every day, the cost of the commute would out earn her earning potential. It's impossible. We also had a couple of people who said that they haven't had return to office mandates and they are hoping that they won't receive them because of the difference working from home has made for their mental health. So I spoke to a woman whose entire team, she works for a mental health charity. So she has a lot of neurodivergent staff, and they rely on working from home. They need to be able to do that. So it is if they were ordered suddenly back to work, even if it was just for 4 days a week rather than the full 5, it would have a huge impact on their mental well-being. I think rates of burnout would increase. It would be extremely stressful.
So how about young workers? Have you been speaking to young workers? Because there's a whole kind of rhetoric around, oh, young workers want to be back in the office because they're missing out on the work culture or learning and mentoring. Can you say a little bit about that or that group of workers?
I'll be super blunt on that, which is that I think that view is quite a lazy, kind of reductionist view. They go, okay, so young workers want to feel connected, they want community, they want learning opportunities. The answer to that isn't to order people back into the office, because a lot of the times what we're doing is, I've heard from people who are in the office, sat there, and all they're doing is just doing Teams calls. They could have done that from home. There's no need for it. I think what we need to be doing really is being honest about, how do we actually foster a sense of social connection? How do we actually collaborate? And how can we do those in ways that extend to people who aren't physically in the same place? So that's really tailoring the way our offices work to make sure that we're not just sitting in offices bored and doing mindless meetings on calls that could be done from home, but also working out ways that we can optimize working from home time. So I know for me specifically, I work in a hybrid structure where we're in the office 2 days a week, and working from home the rest of the time. I know for me personally, I schedule a lot of my kind of deep editing work for when I'm at home because there are fewer distractions. But for in office days, that's when I'm plotting in, collaborative idea generation, chatting things through, working on visual covers. And that's really beneficial. If it was the case that we were to go back to the office full time, I'd find it very difficult to do those parts of my job that are much better suited to working from home. I think younger workers are just very aware of that, and they're very much they are more likely to ask the why of why are we doing it this way, this way of working doesn't work for me. So they're going to question the purpose of it. I think when I was writing my book, Working on Purpose, I spoke to a lot of different workers in different age groups, and that really came through for the younger, like under 25 demographic, where they expect flexibility and they expect any working pattern to have a reason behind it. So if you are going to order people back into work, there needs to be like a solid justification of this is why. You can't just ask Gen Zers to come into the office and then get them to sit there all day on Zoom calls. They just won't do it.
Yeah. Okay. That actually brings me really nicely to kind of a question I have for Emma, is because Emma's been speaking a lot with businesses around remote working. And I would like to ask Emma, so do you see a lot of RTOs across companies in the UK? And also, as Ellen mentioned, like what are the real motivation and how are they communicating this to their workers?
I mean, I think there's a really disparate experience, but I mean, RTO can mean just mandating people coming in 2 days a week or 3 days a week. So it doesn't, although the kind of hard pants approach is like 5 days a week, that which does happen. I think that is very much the minority. And in some ways, it's just a way of giving everybody some clarity over their expectations, which is not a bad thing. That's not punitive or anything like that. And you know, yes, they might be mandated to come in 3 days a week, but that gives them 2 days flexibility or more. So I mean, I'm not in favor of sort of presenteeism, but I just to kind of nuance it slightly. And I think that there is a bit of a stiffening of language. I think partly because people don't, well, lots of different reasons. There's a kind of domino effect. CEOs, if one CEO says, I want to be tough, then you look like a softie if you're not saying it, I guess, unless you make a very good counter case. And another reason is because it's a way of getting rid of people by stealth. So you know, suck it up or go. And a lot of them are hoping that they will go. Some of it is because, I mean, on the kind of, you know, more kind of I think that it's just hybrid can be hard to manage. And so if you're very clear about saying this is what, you know, we want you to come in these days, you know, and anchor days might be part of it, but also just having having some clarity. But also people are very bad at managing their teams, and so, which is an excuse for making them come in, but it is a reason that they would rather they saw them and saw what they were doing rather than managing them virtually and not doing a very good job at it, not understanding what people really do in their jobs, so not being able to measure what they're doing. Those kind of things are the reason, I think. And also some, you know, people like to think that the way things were the better ways. And you know, I was full of optimism that there were kind of experiments happening during COVID in working arrangements, and you know, and thought maybe this will last. And I think that for some people it's no way kind of thing. They haven't learned anything from the experience.
So actually on that note as well, because it seems like this is a lot of a response from companies in terms of trying to frantically kind of deal with the problem, or even just kind of going with the wave of what they think is kind of what other people are doing. But do you think that organizations and companies understand the worker side of what the consequences may be if they were to, even if it's a 3-day office mandate, what that means for workers and what that can actually mean for organizations?
I mean, the ones that want to get rid of people probably don't really care, and the ones that no, I think that is the thing that drives me up the wall about all these mandates, is that, you know, even when they say, and I'm not going to name the company, but even when they say that, you know, we have evidence that you are not as productive as you were, nobody actually shows the evidence. So I'm quite clear that they're not really looking at data within the company. I'm pretty sure they're not really talking to a broad spectrum of employees. I mean, probably they don't care, you know, for everyone's experience. I mean, that's just the reality. They'll be talking to their peers and people that they favour, and they'll be telling them things they want to hear. But that is the problem, is there's a kind of lack of curiosity, and that is what sort of drives me mad about this whole wave of toughening up or whatever, really. I mean, if they want to get rid of people, that is their prerogative, and that's a backdoor way of doing it. But if they really do want to kind of build a workplace that is productive and profitable and also good to their workers, then they should be talking to people about what would work.
Absolutely. Now, that's actually, again, a good segue to kind of move on to Julia, because Julia, you've been working with a lot of companies about designing good practices for a good hybrid working, remote working system. So can you tell us a little bit more about how can we actually design a workplace that can meet some of the concerns that companies have in terms of that culture, collaboration piece, but also some companies and managers I've spoke to are also worried about some of their employees' career perspectives.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. Very much look forward to the comments. I welcome the report. I think it's terrific. The more we debate about this and learn about it and think about uncomfortable truths, the better. And the truth is, no one size fits all for any workplace. And I think the bottom line of it is that we know, don't we, that the workplace, the workforce, the world of work is undergoing the biggest upheaval in a century. A sort of everything everywhere all at once, that movie, which won Best Oscar, the first one after the pandemic, I thought really beautifully captured a number of trends. You know, work and life and laundry and taxes being the leitmotif through that movie, but also the shift to a global perspective, actually. So there is no one size fits all, but obviously for, you know, best part of a century, the corporate world, the business world, and indeed governments and organizations have operated on a one size fits all model. And so there's kind of problem number one. The other thing, just to say by way of context, is that it's an irony, isn't it, that many of the people that welcomed and possibly invested in the technology that's created the mobile era, in which, you know, what I call the amazing age of generations of millennials, Zs, and now alphas, you know, the digitally native mobile world, they are often the same board members that have a bit of a fantasy of stasis. And I think that's just interesting psychologically. You know, how do you square that? Alan Sugar having invented the Amstrad, you know, etc. And also, you know, there is resistance because work should work. And if it doesn't work for people in a hidden way, because they're, you know, boxed into an unfair system of appraisal or remuneration, and they're sort of edged out of saying what works for them, or if managers feel, as many did, that they've gone too far in offering blanket remote work, it's actually reasonable to resist and to have a dialogue about what success would look like. So I think we've got to look at it in the context that everyone's on their own as a workforce. There's no point at all looking at the company next door or the organization next door or the department next door. And I don't want to pick on Jamie Dimon, because I know lots of people think he's a genius and a god, and I'm sure he is. But I thought it was really fascinating that his remarks about flexible work were noted and spun for two reasons. One is banks are a bit different. I mean, Citigroup has made an exception, happens to be run by a woman, but the banks, financial institutions, where some of their tech actually gets really difficult and sticky if it's taken outside of the home. I'm not unsympathetic, and if you can pay people for presenteeism, good luck. But that's not completely the norm. But the other reason why I thought the Jamie Dimon remarks were very interesting is they came almost exactly at the same time that the UAE introduced some of the most radical flexible working legislation on the 1st of April. The Middle East is operating for the future. on a par with Britain and the Nordics. In other words, evidence shows that some of these attitudes in some of the most successful companies of the last 50 years are simply not going to work over the next 50. So anyway, that's the sort of context. I mean, the point about, you know, what's happening. Look, I know of one highly skilled media individual who's been allowed to work remotely and has been the definition of a digital nomad, highly accomplished millennial, now being asked to go back 5 days a week and, you know, watch that space. But it's very interesting. And, you know, there's a question about where are trade unions on this, actually? You know, where's the network of support as the world is increasingly becoming more freelance anyway? So I think that we've got to look at the wider trend as well. And one of those trends is also, if your workplace is asking you to go back, A, are they compensating you if it's costing you more? We absolutely know there's a huge cost to working women, literally. The maths are just, it's a greater cost for women or men to go back to work in terms of childcare. So first of all, what's the compensation? What's the package? And secondly, is there a desk? Before you even get to, is there a reason? You know, is there a desk? Is there, you know, what's happening physically? Because what's really going on is an enormous disconnect between the way that cities and workplaces and offices and buildings are designed and the reality of the cost of coming in before you even get to the culture point. But I suppose I would finish by saying I'm open to whatever works. And I think most people who work are open to whatever works. And, you know, we know that the media is going through paroxysms itself. We know that discussions about specialist things are getting more and more niche and are going into private spheres and groups. So the big legacy media, quote unquote, whether they will be, you know, flex shaming as has been, you know, whether they're going to carry on with that shtick forever, I'm not sure they are. It's not to say that I don't want to be part of a movement that just says flexible working must be a right. But it's got to be on the table. And I do think it is here. And I do think it is utterly pointless to focus on presenteeism as the right metric going forward.
So I'm going to throw this in. It's kind of some of the questions that have been asked as well to Julia, but also Emma and Ellen and Shiyu, you could also kind of jump in. Is this a matter then of lack of information or training of managers? Is it because managers don't know what to do and they're just kind of in a frantic state going back? Or is this, again, as Julia, you pointed out a really important factor there, is this a matter of power where workers now have to collectively, maybe with unions or trade representatives or employee organizations, fight back collectively? Or is there something else? Is it scientists perhaps or practitioners talking to and persuading CEOs better? What is the solution here? So I guess, Julia, you want to start, and I think Ellen, you wanted to kind of come in.
I mean, workers do already have power, and that power is being manifested in talent, in retention and recruitment, which is a major thing. And part of the irony, I think, is that employers need to adjust their set, which is, do you really think you're going to employ somebody for life? Why don't you make the best of it while you've got them? So to some degree, workers do have power. To some degree, they obviously don't, especially in complicated, tightening labour markets. But I think that we've got to factor in all of these shifts. But also, you know, the cui bono, who is benefiting from what? And certainly the Flex Index, which primarily for now focuses on American data, has incredibly rich data. They showed last year that generationally leaders who are older in companies founded before 2000 are the ones that have the most difficulty adjusting and adapting, and those founded afterwards, they don't. But it's not to say that it's not hard. It's not to say that one shouldn't address the issues that come up again and again, like culture. But I mean, the final point I'd say on this is to be imaginative. You know, babies cook in their mother's bellies, if you like, for 9 months. That's a finite, fixed, known period of time. Newbies who need onboarding, they don't need to indefinitely come in all the time. Maybe they come in for 9 weeks. Maybe they come in immersively for 9 months. I mean, there are very specific ways in which companies can and could think, test and learn, iterate, share best practice. That's what I'd like to see more of. It'd be great if you're part of, maybe we can team up with you. You know, where's that data, that real-time data of experimentation and what success looks like rather than what failure looks like being collated?
Alan, did you want to come?
Yeah, just wanted to jump on what you mentioned about managers not having the training to deal with kind of hybrid working. I think it's not a surprise because I think the majority of managers just don't have training, full stop. I know the CIPD did some really powerful research about the rise of the accidental manager. So people who didn't set out to go into management, that just kind of gone that way accidentally and have received no training in how to actually manage or lead a team. And that's so common. I think especially now with kind of millennials hitting that age where they're entering the more senior stages of their careers, the majority of them are experiencing burnout, lack of training, and then that has coincided with the rise of working from home. Of course, we're underprepared for it because we're underprepared for all of it. We just haven't been trained on how to lead people, and so we haven't had the chance to adapt to these different ways of working either.
Yeah. Yeah, just on that also as well. I mean, I'm happy for you to come in if you have any points, but also like there's some question about the unions, and I think there's roles of unions of trying to collectively gather the kind of the demands as well as kind of the learning from workers as well, because unions can be quite effective in trying to get that collective voice together. And we've seen in cases like Unison and other places where unions can actually work with employers more closely to try to, as Julia said, because there's no one size fits all, you really have to work at the local level to try to figure out what actually works for that specific, not even maybe organization, but work group for that work section, if you want. And I think in a way unions, or it could be just any type of way in which workers could work collectively that could help. But and before we go on to kind of a debate, I'm just gonna, Shiyu, there's a couple of questions around. Were there any analysis in terms of other protected characteristics, in particular disability or maybe ethnicity, but also about the kind of RTO mandate in terms of age, like what kind of patterns we see in terms of age groups?
So actually, we're also looking at other characteristics, for example, ethnicity. We found the BME workers are actually more likely to comply because they have this kind of job insecurity, and they have to really be in the office so that they can potentially be more visible for their employers. And because in the data sets for SWAN data, we don't have disability, but in fact, in the labor force survey, and we previously have published paper, we're also looking at the disability as the kind of characteristics, and it actually shows disability. Even in previous research Heejung done with TUC, we also see disability can be really, like for workers working from home, is really important for disabled workers. And for the age group, we didn't present here, but in the full report, we can see younger workers actually more resistant towards go back to office full time, rather than saying younger workers, they don't like, they actually really, I think they actually value home working and the flexibility as much as actually more than we expected. And the trend is that they're also increasingly resistant towards go back to office full time. Yeah,
thank you.
that's the basic.
Yeah. So there's another question that, I mean, I guess this is something, I mean, and I'll maybe respond, but I'm happy for other people to jump in. So there was really a question about fathers and older children, like what is increasing? Why are they also kind of resisting the RTO mandate? And I really wanted to also tell my story. So I've changed jobs last year, just a year ago, and I'm now commuting up to London to lead the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership. None of this would have happened if my partner wasn't working from home pretty much full time. And we hear so many stories of women who, for the first time in their lives, also in their kind of partnered lives, been able to kind of really thrive in the labor market because their partners were able to be at home, as well as spend time with the children and do quite a, I mean, maybe not an equal share, but still a larger share of the housework and childcare. And I think this is something, a sentiment a lot of men are experiencing in terms of, for the first time, they're having a real close connection and relationship with their children, with their partner. And we know that those things enhance men's own well-being as well. It even can enhance children's cognitive abilities. And I think for the family as a unit, men's homeworking may have enhanced the possibility for the family to gain more kind of gainful employment through enabling women to take part in the labor market. So again, we talk about women, but actually a lot of the main characters of the story is men and fathers, but also workers without children. Does any, I mean, Julia, you've been nodding along. Did you have anything else to add to that? Oh, you're muted. Yeah, there you
I've always come off mute. God, 5 years in and we still make that mistake. Yes, I mean, my husband was the house husband. He's an antiquarian bookseller, so he took advantage of the technology. He was one of Amazon's first booksellers online, secondhand booksellers online. So yeah, I totally concur with that. In the end, though, the technology is actually the driver of the cultural change, because women from the 70s, weren't we? We're talking about flexibility and nobody gave two hoots, right? And then what happened was the pandemic came along. We all switched to Zoom. We all understood that the corporates pivoted actually admirably and successfully as a crisis management exercise. Suddenly, the men understood that the show could go on. And ironically, women suffered horrendously during the pandemic, working women especially, because the men were like, sorry, I'm on, largely generalizing, I'm on Zoom, love, you do the homework with the children and you do your work as well. But, the technology is the third party in the room here, in the same way that at the end of the 19th century, oil and electricity and transportation transformed very basis of work that was done through America. We're in a new era now. For instance, OWL Labs, one of the technologies for remote meetings, their data consistently shows that you never ever get 100% quorum meeting where somebody isn't able to attend remotely or trying to attend remotely. What's the point in pretending you're going to get everybody in all the time? Someone's on holiday, someone's on maternity leave, someone's sick, someone's off site. The other thing we haven't talked about in this is that the world of work has been global for a very long time. It didn't, before Donald Trump focused everybody's attention on the rest of the world, anybody that works for a multinational in a different time zone with a different team, I mean, they're meeting colleagues digitally all the time. So there is a big question. It does come back to management and leadership. Like, what the hell is going on with management and leadership? That's not doing very well. And I think it's much easier for those naysayers on flexible work, all of whom are in horrible matrix structures that are rigid and old and creaking, to bloody well blame everybody else but themselves because they don't know what to do. And that, to me, is by far the biggest story. How do you manage people when you might have no authority, no decision making? When you can't be heard if you say, listen, you know what, this little team needs to come in for 12 days constantly, and then we don't need to see them again for 3 months. We're not having those conversations, and I just really wish we would.
Yeah. And Ellen, you want to come in on this? Ellen, yeah.
I was just nodding in response to everything Julia was saying. Just spot on.
Okay, actually, so one of the things, maybe this is something for you, Emma. There was a question around what are the kind of data on the efficacies of product or the effectiveness of kind of productivity for working from home. Like, where's the data? Have you seen kind of some of these evidences? Or maybe it's, as you say, maybe there's no evidence, but then what are kind of the feelings around these issues that companies are using to base their policies on?
I mean, I think that there isn't very good data on productivity, and everybody has their kind of I don't know. I find that with the reporting, there's a lot of kind of misrepresentation. So there's a lot of reporting that will say, you know, people are really lazy at home, and then you'll look at it and it'll be, you know, but they're in the office 3 days a week, or vice versa, and it's very complicated, and it's comparing large companies in China with small companies, you know, different roles and different organizations, and so I kind of feel like that I haven't found the silver bullet in terms of data that shows. I mean, I guess as each company goes through its own, you know, kind of remit, seeing whether their profits fall is one way of kind of measuring output, but the kind of but internally, I don't think for white collar jobs, I think it is quite difficult to measure. And, you know, am I working now? Well, I'm not doing anything for the FT, really. But with that, you know, but I could say I am. But, you know, that it's not like, as everyone says, it's not like kind of being somebody on the production line where you can see how many widgets they're producing. So I think it is really hard. I think that some of the things that people did with the 4-day week experiment, which I thought was interesting, was really being clear about what people were doing, and that for many people that had been the first time that they'd really broken down white collar work. And so I think that's the problem, and I don't think that companies are really looking or often have good measurements unless they're very engineering heavy, software engineering heavy, and they know, you know, that they've got performance matrix. But I think a lot of things are much harder to judge.
I'd just like to chime in and say I agree with that. I think it's so difficult for us to quantify what productivity even is now, especially with the rise of AI. We're going to have to value more human-centric skills more, and that isn't a pure like productivity metric. It's about softer skills of managing people, of being creative, and I think that that plays into the benefits of working from home as well. It's us challenging the idea that the point of work is to get out as much as possible, because realistically AI can do better than us at that.
I think just to add to that, one of the recent kind of reports that have come out was to look at how RTO companies performed in comparison to other similar companies using Fortune 500. And what we can see is that they haven't actually done any better in terms of a number of matrices with terms of performances. So as Emma said, it's really difficult because there's a whole range of things and you're comparing apples and oranges. But having said that, RTO did not necessarily increase performance again on a large number of measures. And the final thing is to say, because it's so ambiguous, one of the things you can do is to look at what it working from home impacts that increases performance, such as worker motivation, commitment, as well as kind of retention or absenteeism, sickness, well-being elements, which we know that impacts performance. But again, this is very, very difficult. And this, I think, is actually, and this is the whole point, kind of Emma talked about the whole 4-day week. What was it? Actually, who was it? Like talked about the whole 4-day week. Yeah. Because I think one of the problems that Julia was mentioning in terms of management is that up to this point, we were measuring input rather than output, because it's just so difficult to measure output and to measure really good ways of kind of our kind of work design. And I think that is probably one of the issues there. So one of the other questions that came up was, oh, there's a couple of other questions. Oh, sorry. There was one about kind of the gender, like working from home is all good, but doesn't it perpetuate gender division of labor in terms of kind of women doing more work, more household work? Anyone want to come in on that point?
I can talk about this.
Oh, yes, Shiyu, yes.
Because I think because we did research a paper on this, looking at the UK household longitudinal survey from 209 to 2024. Is a very long time period, and especially we found after the pandemic, actually the male partners working from are actually helping releasing the female partner's burden, and there's quite a lot of theory saying because when they're being able to be at home for a longer time, the exposure to this kind of housework, this troublesome kind of domestic burden, allows men to really able to understand the same equality, a lot of burden for the female partner actually can help in way to change the potential norms of the gender norms. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
So there's a couple of other comments, which is actually, I don't think it was it's a question, but rather a comment about kind of RTO mandate, especially 5-day RTOs are very kind of lazy approach and really haven't adapted to the changing landscape of work and attitude of workers, where again, I think Ellen, you mentioned it as well, where the new world of work, especially younger workers, but I think across the board after the pandemic, people are not living to work, especially because work isn't paying as much as it once used to and not providing as much benefit. So people have really changed their way, and that managers need to creatively think about new ways of work design. And another person has mentioned how this may be because the RTO mandates is because workers like hybrid working a bit too much, and that actually makes managers a little bit suspicious about this, but that it has really allowed people, and this is a story that you told, Ellen, about how it has actually improved people's well-being because they could move out of the city and be able to get on the housing ladder and actually have a good life without kind of having to bear the costs of it by working, themselves to death. So we're almost down to closing. I just want to thank everybody for attending, as well as our panelists who have been absolutely wonderful in providing us with an amazing kind of insights into what the RTO means, why it is happening, how can we persuade companies to maybe kind of rethink their ways. And again, I just want to thank you on behalf of the audience here for your time and your contributions to this webinar. I just want to, before I end, I just want to say that the recording will be made available on your YouTube channels, and I would encourage everyone to share it with your colleagues and networks, and perhaps your boss. And also, it's the research that we shared today is our ongoing kind of work as a part of the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership, and we'll be continuing to track these trends and their implication, including how best to actually address some of these issues. So again, thank you again for Julia, Emma, Ellen, Shiyu for the expertise, and thank you all for attending, and good afternoon.